Welcome to our weekly maritime vlog. I'm Corey Ransom with International Maritime Security Associates. We have Bennett, the producer, behind the camera. This week, we are going to give you a wrap-up of the IMO's Maritime Safety. Thank you for joining us this week. We appreciate all the viewers we have. We thought it would be a good idea back in May of 2018, from May 16th to the 25th, the IMO, or the International Maritime Organization's MSC, or Maritime Safety Committee, met as they do pretty much on a yearly basis, usually May, June timeframe, where they go through a number of issues on the docket to take a look at making improvements or changes to IMO regulations. We've talked about the IMO before in past videos. There's a couple of them we'll link down below here where we've kind of talked about the structure and the membership of the IMO. But just for a quick recap and review, the IMO, or the International Maritime Organization, sits under the greater body of the United Nations. And with all of the member states that are a part of the United Nations and also part of the IMO, this is where the beginnings of maritime regulations and maritime laws start, is typically in the IMO. So the SOLAS is the biggest piece under the IMO, the safety of life at sea, that covers a slew of things from safety and security to life safety to training. So SOLAS is a big part of it. But there's a number of other things that come out of the IMO. So we thought it would be a good idea just to quickly kind of summarize some of the interesting points that we saw out of this. Right now, the full report on the recording of this is not available, but once we have that, we will link you to the full report through all of our social media. So what we did, we printed out the agenda from this year just to kind of get an idea of some of the items. There was 22 different items that were on this year's agenda, and they went from just general things about adoption for things that need to be carried from a mandatory standpoint on board a vessel, to new regulations within the tanker fleet, to ship design and construction. There were some interesting things that happened on the satellite communication side. A really interesting piece that we've talked about before in past blogs is when we start to talk about autonomous ships and how does that look. And a lot of the regulatory side from that will come out of the IMO, but also a lot of individual member states. So it's going to be interesting as we really press forward into this new age of technology, or what we call the fourth industrial revolution, as we see how the shipping industry, from that perspective, the digital bridge and autonomous shipping and the movement of data and information to vessels and shoreside, is really going to change. So there's a lot of exciting things, and the MSC is really kind of on the beginning stages of looking at how these regulations are going to affect the greater maritime industry. And it's a discussion that honestly is going to take place over a number of years, and it won't just involve the IMO. There's labor implications on this and minimum manning implications. So there's a lot that needs to be decided before we move into autonomous ships. So it's going to be a few years before we see autonomous ships moving about the ocean. There was an update on piracy and armed robbery against ships. We just did an update a couple of weeks ago on that and kind of gave you an idea of the scope of things that were happening in 2017. So we'll have a link to that vlog here down below. So it was a pretty good program that they went through for the week time period that the Maritime Safety Committee met. So let's just dive right into the report. We're not going to cover every item under every agenda piece because we would be on here forever and you guys would be tired of hearing my voice drone on and on. So we thought we'd hit just some of the highlights. We'll have a link to the interim report in the comment section below. And then eventually, like I said, when the full report comes out, we'll link that in our social media so you guys can see that as well. So from the standpoint of some things that happened, there was some changes to the FTP, or the Fire Protection Code, or Fire Test Procedures of 2010. There were some resolutions that were made to that specifically for passenger carrying ships. One of the interesting things, and we've talked about this on a previous blog, was under the radio communication services when it comes to SOLAS and to specifically to the GMDSS, or the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. In the past, the company Inmarsat was the sole provider of that data and communication link to the GMDSS service. Well, through the MSC 99, through this past meeting, now Iridium is also been approved as being a communication link to this system. So it's exciting to see as technology moves forward that we have another company that now is in the mix as part of being an approved satellite company. We talked about what they call MASS, or the Maritime Autonomous Surface Ships. There was a lot of discussion in that as we've just started to really kind of scratch the surface for what they would call kind of the common understanding. And the committee looked at a number of things with it when it was considered kind of the regulatory scope, what the framework is going to look like, how some agreements are going to be put together from a high level standpoint. So this was really kind of the first delve into that high level. And I would be willing to bet that in the meetings subsequent to this in the coming years, that this autonomous ship item will start to become a bigger and bigger agenda item for the MSC. There was also some updates to what was called the GBS, or the Global Based Ship Construction Standards for bulk carriers and oil tankers, and some interesting changes in Part B or Part A of the verification guidelines and Part B of the verification guidelines as well. There was some changes to what's called the carriage of cargoes and containers on load factors for the liquefied gas, and some other things, and we won't get into all the details of that. There was some also some changes that were made, which would be of interest, I think, to some of our viewers, what's called the safety measures for non-solar ships operating in polar waters. We did an episode a few weeks ago about some of the changes to what are called the polar codes. The Maritime Safety Committee is also looking at some of the changes and safety measures that would be recommended for kind of the non-SOLAS vessels. So you're looking at pleasure yachts that would fall kind of outside of that SOLAS. It would be develop safety measures for fishing vessels and pleasure yachts above 300 gross tons that are not engaged in trade, and cargo ships below that 500 gross ton standpoint. So there's some changes that are going to be recommended to that, and there'll be additionally the committee agreed to further considering some outstanding issues on this topic that they're going to look at in December of 2018. There was also some changes to electrical power systems. Now, we've seen in the past few years on a couple of different cruise ships, there were power issues where the systems on board the ship shut down, but not all of critical systems, or what the MSC would determine as critical passenger systems, were connected to the emergency generator system. So that's one thing that's also been looked at as well. There are some new safety procedures when it came to survival craft and rescue boats. As vessels get bigger, the drop point where these rescue craft drop off the vessel has gotten higher and higher. So there's been some really interesting testing for rescue craft and vessels from a higher standpoint when you're talking about 20,000 TEU ships. And then also some of the self-righting vessels. So once they drop in the water, to make sure that they are self-righting. And then some other things with the codes when it comes to that. So there has been a lot of interesting changes. We just kind of hit on some of the highlights of that. But again, we'll have a link to that kind of interim report located below. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate all the subscribers and all the viewers we have across YouTube and all of our social media. We really appreciate you guys. Make sure if you have any questions on this topic or any of our other topics that you reach out to us right here through YouTube or through any of our social media. We also ask you, hey, connect to us through our social media and join the conversation. Our links to our social media are detailed in the banner above and also in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel so you get notified immediately when we put out new videos and great content. Also, make sure you hit that like button for all the videos you like so we know kind of what direction you guys want to go when it comes to content. If there's anything that we can do for you from the perspective of maritime regulatory compliance, risk management, or maritime security, don't ever hesitate to reach out to us, because we're always happy to steer you in the right direction.